All right, let's dive in. It's Friday, July 4th, 2025, about 6:13 p.m. here in Japan. And just setting the scene, the Nikkei average futures are sitting around 39,662 yen, still trending down a bit. And that sort of, well, volatility, it really ties into what we're talking about today. We're looking deep into Donald Trump's proposed tariffs. But maybe from an angle you haven't considered, our sources suggest there's a much deeper strategy here than just, trade protection. You probably heard Japan's struggling a bit with the talks, right? And there's speculation about the upper house elections maybe playing a part in that. Things are moving fast. Trump's already sending letters out. We're hearing tariff numbers like, well, 70% in some cases. For Japan, it's been mentioned maybe 30, 35%, or even just a value we set, which, adds to that cloudy outlook for the Nikkei.
Yeah, absolutely. And our goal today really is to try and unravel the true thinking behind these tariffs. We want to get past the usual trade war narrative and understand the core strategy, especially now with AI becoming so central globally.
Okay, so this core idea. Our sources are floating this, well, pretty striking hypothesis that these tariffs are basically a modern sakoku, like Japan's old isolation policy. Can you sort of walk us through that? How does that framework even apply here?
It's a fundamental shift in perspective. The idea is that Trump views the sheer volume of imports coming into the U.S. as, let's call it economic aggression, particularly in the context of AI growth.
Economic aggression, how so?
Well, think about it this way. A product gets made in, say, China. China pays for the electricity to manufacture it, right?
Right.
But once it lands in the U.S., there's this whole other chain of energy use. Our sources call it indirect electricity consumption. That's the power used domestically in the U.S. for trucking it, storing it, managing it in warehouses, delivering it, even the energy needed to eventually dispose of it.
Okay. I hadn't thought about that disposal part adding up.
It all adds up.
Yeah.
So this indirect electricity consumption, it's the power the importing country uses after production. And reducing that seems to be a primary goal for Trump.
Okay, that's a different lens. So for you listening, how do these huge potential tariffs fit into this indirect electricity picture? What does it mean?
Well, fundamentally, high tariffs push up the base price of imported goods,
Yeah,
makes them more expensive for American consumers,
obviously.
which then forces a moment of pause, right? People have to ask, do I really need this? It discourages casual mass consumption.
Which is the opposite of the globalization model we've had for decades.
Exactly. Globalization was all about optimizing supply chains for cheap, mass-produced goods. Get costs down, sell more. But in the AI era, electricity is critical. It's like the blood of AI, powering data centers, training models. It's immensely valuable. So from this perspective, mass consumption of imported goods with all that indirect electricity use, it's seen as wasteful. Maybe even, as our sources put it, economic terror, because it diverts energy from developing America's own AI capabilities.
And China was the first target.
China was definitely an early major target for high tariffs, yes. And this framework suggests it was because their mass production model led to huge indirect consumption in the U.S.
So these tariffs, they're not just a negotiation tactic.
It seems unlikely they'll come down easily. They look more like part of a longer-term, maybe even isolationist strategy, aimed at creating conditions that really only benefit the U.S. energy-wise, which, unfortunately for countries like Japan, might mean they just have to accept these higher tariffs. There might not be much room to negotiate if this is the underlying philosophy.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. Does this strategy hit all imports equally, or is there a difference based on what is being imported?
That's a really key point. The analysis suggests a clear distinction. They seem to separate imports into, let's say, absolute necessities versus more desire-driven goods. Luxuries, maybe.
Okay. Necessities would be?
Things like energy imports themselves, pharmaceuticals, crucial components for making semiconductors, stuff the country really can't function without. Those are likely less impacted by the highest tariffs.
Got it. And the desire-driven category.
That's where you find things like cars, clothes, general merchandise, toys, home appliances, accessories, even alcohol. The policy seems aimed squarely at suppressing imports of these kinds of goods because they drive that indirect electricity consumption without being, strictly speaking, necessary.
So how does Japan fit in here? I mean, cars are a massive export for them to the U.S.
Right. We looked at an AI-assisted analysis models trained on logistics, energy data, trade flows. It paints a pretty stark picture. You know the top U.S. import partners? Mexico, China, Canada, Germany, Japan. They're all up there. But when you apply this desire-driven filter, a simulation showed something striking about Japan. Roughly 60%, 60, of Japan's total exports to the U.S. fall into that desire-driven category. And yes, automobiles are the biggest piece of that by far.
60%.
Yeah. And what's really significant is that figure 60% is comparable to the estimated ratios for China and Mexico. Countries already facing high tariffs. Precisely. So from this U.S. strategic viewpoint we're exploring, Japan's exports, especially cars, are currently seen as adding to that economic aggression via indirect electricity use. That likely explains a lot about the difficulties Japan's facing in negotiations. Their export profile clashes directly with this potential energy strategy.
And you mentioned the politics in Japan earlier.
Yeah, it certainly puts pressure on them domestically, doesn't it?
That's it.
Especially with those upper house elections potentially on the horizon. The outlook for avoiding significant tariffs based on this analysis, well, it looks tough.
Okay, let's zoom out. If we put all this together, the tariffs, the energy focus, the desire versus necessity goods, what's the ultimate goal here? What's the big picture behind this American Sukoku?
The synthesis suggests it's about building up a surplus of electricity, creating energy security and abundance, specifically to fuel U.S. dominance in artificial intelligence.
By cutting down on imports?
By cutting down imports, yes, and therefore slowing down some aspects of American consumer activity through those high tariffs. It directly reduces that indirect electricity consumption we talked about.
So it's tariffs and maybe taxes too?
Potentially, yes. Sort of dual strategy.
Yeah.
High tariffs, maybe high taxes, aimed at bolstering domestic industry while also implementing this energy-focused isolation.
Our sources even suggest Trump might be consciously drawing inspiration from, say, the Edo shogunate's focus on self-reliance.
That's quite a parallel.
It is. But if you think about it from a national leader's perspective, massive consumption of foreign goods that quickly become domestic waste. Waste that then needs energy just to dispose of.
Yeah.
You can see how that might seem, well, undesirable.
Like a nation overeating and overdrinking, draining its energy.
Something like that. It moves beyond just trade deficits. It's about conserving vital resources. And it connects back perhaps to that Make America Great Again slogan. Maybe one interpretation is building a more muscular America, one that's leaner, conserves energy, and focuses it strategically on things like AI leadership. So, bringing it back to you, our listener, what's the takeaway here? What does this all mean?
Well, I think this deep dive really highlights a potential fundamental shift in how economics might be viewed, moving away from purely trade-based thinking towards something centered on energy and resource management. As the world reorganizes around AI, around managing power grids, around resource constraints, maybe you need to think about how your own consumption, your own understanding of global trade might need to, well, rebalance. It definitely leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? In a world where every single purchase, especially of imported goods, has a measurable energy footprint, what do we really consider a necessity versus just a desire? That line might be shifting for all of us in the years ahead.